What's up, beautiful people? It's Sindafam. Welcome to the channel. Today we have Thomas Sowell on the effects of victimology. Awesome. I'm excited to check this one out. Let's check it out.
Tom Sowell, for once I'm going to quote a column you wrote instead of basic economics, but we'll come back to this book. A column you wrote earlier this month. Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times, got under your skin, and not for the first time. Readers of your column will know. New York Times writer Nicholas Kristof, I'm quoting you, asserts that there is, you're quoting him, overwhelming evidence that centuries of racial subjugation still shape inequity in the 21st century, quote, closing quote, and he mentions, open quote, the lingering effects of slavery, close quote. And now this is Tom Sowell. If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, in 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery, 22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%.
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents.
Yes.
Wow.
30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. And so I said, well, let us compare, if we can speculate on how much that 22% was due to the legacy of slavery. But we know that that tripling was not due to the legacy of slavery. It was due to the legacy of a whole different set of policies. And you can, and you can look at it so many other ways. Education. Stuyvesant High School in New York, as you know, you get into only by passing a very tough exam. In 2012, the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School was less than 1/10 of the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School 33 years earlier.
What is the problem?
I didn't know that.
There's Dunbar High School in Washington, which was an elite black high school for a very long time. In 1993, the number of kids out of Dunbar High School who went on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, which would have been in the depth of the Great Depression. And so you can run through a whole bunch of other things like that. Look at the housing projects. The housing projects in the first half of the 20th century, during that first 100 years after slavery, did not have the high crime rates, the murder rates, the graffiti, all the rest of it we associate. None of that was there. People, like the New York Times, Kristof should read his own old papers, pointed out that on Saturday mornings it was common in the housing project of this earlier era for parents to leave their doors unlocked, because some of the parents could afford television, some couldn't. So the ones who had television would leave their doors unlocked, and the kids from the other families could come down there and watch television with them.
Those times.
Well, now the latest figures show that most people below the poverty line have 2 television sets and cable, but they wouldn't dare leave their doors unlocked in a public housing project.
I'm quoting that column again. Liberals have wreaked more havoc on blacks than the supposed legacy of slavery they talk about.
Yes.
You don't mean that hyperbolically.
No, I do not.
You mean it.
Yeah, and another thing, crime and violence. Now we take it for granted that there's tremendous levels of crime and violence in the black community. That was not always the case. In the 20s, it was very common for white celebrities, including George Gershwin and William Faulkner, to go up to Harlem not only for entertainment places, but to go into private homes of people they knew. And Gershwin played Rhapsody in Blue in this home where Walter White lived. Milton Friedman, when he was a graduate student at Columbia, he and the lady he later married would go dancing at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And he said, we had no fear of being mugged or accosted on the street or anything like that.
I've heard you say, Tom, when you were a boy growing up in Harlem yourself, your own neighborhood felt totally safe to you.
Not totally safe. I wouldn't exaggerate, but there's nothing resembling today. I mean, I did sleep on hot nights. I would sleep out on the fire escape. When I tell people in Harlem that today, they think I'm from another galaxy, you know. But that people slept on the fire escapes in New York and in the public parks in the 30s, all over the city.
Wow.
Because it was not a jungle. There was a lady. One other example. There was a woman who was a black woman in Harlem who was an actress. She would go down to the theater district, and then after the play, they'd have their drinks and eat something or whatever. And she said at 1 o'clock in the morning, she would simply get on the subway and go on up to Harlem and walk home from there. Wow. Now, it so happens that the subway station she got off at was very near a grocery store where I was a delivery boy. And on Saturday nights, I would be working usually until around midnight. And when I would go home, I would go past that very same subway station she's talking about. I never had the slightest trouble.
So if the comparison between progress, simply the decency of life available to people, they weren't, families were intact and schools worked and the neighborhoods were more or less safe. People were able to lead decent lives. If the contrast between that world and the world we inhabit now is owing so directly to liberal policies intended, so we're told, to help African Americans, why do African Americans support the more liberal of the two parties, the Democratic Party, at the rates of 90 and more %? Why is the first African American president so deeply committed to promoting and extending liberal policies? Why is his African American Attorney General, again, so deeply committed to affirmative action and other? Why? This makes no sense. I don't think we could be enough hours for you to answer all of those. But to take the political thing, one of the things I discovered in the research for my book I'm currently working on is that leaders of groups that are lagging in countries around the world almost invariably have counterproductive policies for them. And it makes perfect sense, because insofar as members of lagging groups assimilate into the values and achievements of the larger society, they don't need those leaders. You see this. You look at the history of the Czechs in the 19th century. People are worried that the Czechs are all learning to speak German. Well, at that time, if you wanted to become a professional person, scientist, anything like that, you had to use books that were written in German. Right. Simply because the German acquired a volume of literature centuries ahead of Czech. And yet they fought tooth and nail against that. If you look at in Sri Lanka, one of the arguments that was made there to the Buddhist leaders was that if we don't do something, the Tamil minority will assimilate members of the Sinhalese majority, and then there will be no Buddhists or Sinhalese in another several generations. And so, I mean, there's no mystery to me as to why Jesse Jackson says what he does, or Al Sharpton and others, because that benefits them, but it does not benefit the people they lead. And all the incentives are for leaders to lead people into things that don't help the people, but help the leaders. What you'd create there would be an exception for Dr. King, though, wouldn't there?
Yes, but
he was different because he was earliest, or what? Why? What's different about him?
Well, it's like insurgent movements in general. When an insurgency starts off, by definition, it has an uphill battle. Now, and you can look at the history of Christianity, for heaven's sake. If you're going to be a Christian in the Roman Empire, before in the first century, you had a lot of grief to go through. Now, but after Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, this is a bonanza. And there's a lot to be done. And so now you will follow policies that are the opposite of what you advocated. You will see that with all kinds of other insurgent movements.
Okay. Last questions. Who was Miss Sheroff?
She was my eighth grade teacher, homeroom teacher.
And tell me the story about getting detention one day.
Well, I was sometimes bored in class. And so I would do various little things to just liven things up, I think is the way to put it. I remember once there was one prank that really got her, and she said, "Oh, if I ever find out who did this, Sowell." I mean, the presumption of innocence was just not there. And so one afternoon, I'm being kept in after school as per usual, and Miss Sheriff is sitting down there with her papers to work on, and she says, "Well, here we are again, Sowell, just the two of us." And I said, "Good grief, Miss Sheriff, if we keep staying after school together all the time, people will begin to talk." And she said, "We'll just have to live with the scandal." She didn't even look up from her papers.
Okay, now that story, combine that story with this quotation from Basic Economics, where government restricts its economic role to that of an enforcer of laws and contracts. Some people say that such a policy amounts to doing nothing as far as the economy is concerned. However, what is called nothing has taken centuries to achieve.
Yes.
So you put Miss Sheriff together with that quotation from Basic Economics, and you get Tom Sowell's view of the world, which is that human beings are unruly, they need constraints, even as the 8th grade Tom Sowell needed to be punished needed to be kept after school.
There was no Eric Holder to keep them from punishing me. Heaven knows I might have gone into become a criminal.
So your view is that life is hard. People are not angels.
No.
They need social structures, they need laws, and a government that enforces the law and gives us some stability and civil comedy is doing enough.
In most cases, yes.
In most cases, yes. All right. Another person from your past that I'd like to know about. This is from a recent column. Professor Sterling Brown.
Oh, yes.
Sterling Brown remains as much a hero to me in my old age as he was when I was a freshman at Howard University. He wrote bitterly eloquent attacks on racism, and yet when I was preparing to go off to Harvard, he said to me, "Don't come back here to tell me you didn't make it, because white folks were mean."
Yes.
Close quote. Sterling Allen Brown, who's known to the rest of us as an important poet, a literary figure, you knew him how? And
I took 2 classes for him. One was in literature, but one was in creative writing. And a number of people who took his classes have gone on to become well-known writers, by the way. I knew nothing. I didn't know he was a writer or anything else when I took his class.
I see. So what did he mean when he said to you, you knew that he knew that racism existed because he wrote about it?
Yes.
And yet he said, what's he saying? He's saying, don't let it hold you back? What is he saying to you?
That's right. And he was essentially burning my bridges behind me so that I wouldn't dare show my face on Howard University campus if I didn't make it at Harvard.
I see. So you can't stand self-pity. Is that part of what's going on here?
Partly, yeah.
And somehow or other, the liberal project plays on pity.
Yes. And in fact, in the book that I'm writing now, I discovered this is true not only in the United States, it's true in England, and the situation is wholly different. And yet, if you read the data, for example, from London, the educational tests and so forth, you see that there, immigrants from Africa pass this test they have. I'm talking about low-income people now. Nearly 60% of the time. Blacks from Caribbean, like 50%, so on. Native-born whites in the same low-income bracket pass this test 30% of the time. And it's the same thing. The foreign people come in, they haven't had generations of being steeped in the welfare state vision, the vision of grievances, victimology, and resentments. The idea that there are enemies out there dedicated to keeping you down. That's the message that's been pumped into the head of the white lower class in Britain, and that's the image that's been pumped into the black low-income people in the United States, and the results are the same in both cases.
What would Sterling Allen Brown want to say to Al Sharpton and the protesters in Ferguson today?
I don't know.
What would you say to them, to Al Sharpton and
Well, I'm sure it couldn't be repeated on television, but I would say nothing actually.
Why is that?
I am sure that Jesse Jackson makes 10 times as much money a year as I do. And I don't think I should take on the project of convincing somebody to reduce his income by 90%.
Wow. Wow. The concept of victimology. Now, I've just got to say that, I mean, this is not just a black thing. I'm not just going to categorically say a black thing, but it's very common amongst blacks where this talk of victimology is very common amongst blacks, but all the same, a lot of people do it. The idea where people would say, oh, there are people keeping me down, especially it happens, especially in as humans, you feel really upset when you see a certain person doing well than you do. Be like, oh, because I don't have the resources, or because I am not I don't have access to all of these things, therefore there are some constraints, or people are the ones keeping me down, and you blame most of those issues, blame it on somebody. I mean, you blame those things on somebody. But another thing I've got to ask is, especially with the way blacks are complaining, to say, especially black Americans are complaining and saying that they don't have access to good education, the schools they have around them, they are not well taught. I've got to say that have you guys actually come down to some places to see how the schools are? Because if you have, and if you do, you would understand that life is ups and downs. People from Africa travel abroad to study. Those same schools, in fact, some of the schools that people from Africa travel to Western world or other parts of the country or other parts of the world to study, because some people, the education system, they look at it and they're like, okay, I don't think this is right for my kids. They better go out to get good education. And now I'm saying for those that have access to that. How about those that don't have access to that? Again, the problem is in America, from elementary school or kindergarten or whatever the name is, to secondary school, which you guys tell me it's college or something, it's probably free. But going to school is a problem. You guys complain, oh, the education system, oh, the ones we have in a neighborhood, the education is poor, they don't teach us. But how about you just go and start from somewhere? Even the schools we have here, some parts in Africa where the schooling system or the schooling education is poor, is bad, people still go to school. And the worst thing is in Nigeria, or in Nigeria or in Africa as a whole, most schools, majority of the schools are being paid for. Like individuals pay tuition fees to kids. They go to school and it's mandatory. It's freaking mandatory for freaking requirement for people to go to school. Whether they have the money or not, people go to school. Whether the education system is good or bad, people go to school. I mean, there is nothing worse that is happening in America that is not happening, that is not the same in other parts of the world. It's not just America that is the problem. The governments all think alike. They all, like, in my opinion, the government have a certain community where all of them, they have the same language. They communicate with each other the same way. I mean, but the black Americans always have one issue or the other. It's either today they say the employment rate is low, they don't have access to good jobs. Tomorrow they say we don't have access to good quality education, therefore we did not go to school. That is not an excuse for you not to go to school. I mean, you're not paying school fees, it's free of charge, so why are you guys not going to school? That is my concern. And then this, oh my god, Even in Africa, some people still have this mentality where they be like, oh, because this person is doing well or doing better than me, therefore somebody from my village or somebody somewhere is standing against me or is working against me, and all that nonsense like talk and stuff. Look, the only person that can stop you from doing what you're doing is you. Apart from the fact that sometimes life would happen, societal factors, economic factors, but if we're being honest, let's just be honest amongst ourselves. If we're being honest, I don't see any reason why an average American or an average Black American, let's say even low-income Black American, would have it a problem going to school when education is free. Even though the system is not, you guys complain this education system or there is bad and poor and whatever. I don't see the problem. Even here in Africa, low-income families, they still send their children to school. They still pay tuition fees for them. They survive. So why is it a problem? I just want to leave you guys with one note. An idle mind is the devil's workshop, just in case you don't know. And look at it here. You say their neighborhood, Black neighborhoods, is a problem. Like the kind of things that happens in the, like, it's unsafe to an extent. And you guys don't see it a problem. Why is violence always the answer to you guys? Oh my God. What I just want to say is, as human beings, whatever color you have on your skin, you should remove that thought of being victimized. Nobody is doing you. I mean, sometimes we are limited to some things, to what we can have access to, but the little you can, help yourself with it and stop being a victim. Well, even if you guys complain in America that, okay, there are no jobs, or the employment rate for you guys in America is low, like let's say the Black Americans, they say the employment rate is low. Come to freaking Africa, there are no jobs. But you don't hear people go out and about and say, oh, the government this, the government that. Hi, yes, people look for a way to travel out abroad to make a good living for themselves. If it's not good for you, you leave. I mean, you can also get a good job somewhere. You leave. Or is leaving the place now a problem? Did the government stop you from leaving? In the last time I checked, you're not living in North Korea. So why is it a problem to leave? But yeah, I just want to say that this idea of we've been victims and stuff and complaints and everything, we should stop it. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment down below. I would love you to share some more useful information you think might be really helpful. And until next time, see you in the next video.